Salve omnes and welcome to this week's video tutorial, chapter 17, the relative pronoun. This topic is an important one. As always, you'll want to read through the chapter, paying particular attention to the examples and also completing the self-tutorial exercises in the back of the book. What do we mean when we talk about relative pronouns? Well, in English, these are sometimes called adjective clauses. And as you can see right here, we're using a pronoun, who, which, that, whom, whose, or some other common ones that describe what's called an antecedent. And an antecedent is a word in the main clause that the adjectival clause, or the relative pronoun in this case, is describing. So they give an example right here. The man was from Italy. That would be the main clause, but you could say the man who arrived yesterday was from Italy. So who arrived yesterday would be our adjective clause in English, or in this case, who, referring back to man, or qui in Latin, describing the antecedent, or in this instance, the man in the main clause. So one of the challenges with this chapter is just sorting in your minds basic English grammar and what that looks like in Latin, and in particular being able to recognize the main clause and the independent clause, or the main clause or the subordinate clause in Latin. When you go from one language to another, as some of you may know, they sometimes use different grammatical terminology to describe the same phenomenon. So this is a topic where you might want to use English grammar for students of Latin, or do some independent learning on the web, just to make sure that you understand the concepts as we go through the chapter. These are the relative pronouns. I'm toggling over them right now that need to be memorized in Latin. As Wheelox points out, there's really the only practical procedure is to memorize them, and with time and practice, you'll be able to recognize them. But we'll be able to, or rather, we need to be able to recognize what the relative pronoun is and what its function is in the subordinate clause. So I'll be referring to these throughout the lesson. This right here is some other basic definitions and descriptions and usages of relative pronouns in Latin. Here's another example in Latin. Here we have the woman is wise, femina est sapiens. That would be our main clause. But then if we're giving more information about the woman, we introduce it with the relative pronoun. Here we need quam, because what we have here is the woman whom you are praising is wise. So whom you are praising is the relative clause, or the subordinate clause. So laudes is our subject and verb, which makes the relative pronoun in this case accusative singular, or the direct object. So we go back to our examples here. Here we're using quam because woman is feminine, but then we're using it as an accusative, which, based on the organization of the book, this is nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, in terms of the basic patterns, which you should be familiar with by now, having used the book for almost 2 years. So what does it mean by usage and agreement down here? In practice, the relative pronoun is fairly easy once we learn to recognize the main clause. And so here we have femina est sapiens, the woman is wise. So then we have to ask ourselves a series of questions, which are indicated in the description here. Is it singular or plural? Well, femina is singular. What is the gender? Well, it's feminine. So we have two pieces of information that are going to be important because we need singular feminine. So whatever relative pronoun we use, it's going to come from this column here, quae, cujus, cuju, quam, que. The last piece, which in my experience sometimes takes a little time for students to grasp and master is, what is its function in the relative or adjectival clause? Well, as we just indicated, its function here is the direct object. So since its function is the direct object, we need the accusative form of the relative pronoun, which is quam. And we read it once again. The translation would be, the woman whom you are praising is wise. So I'll be referring a number of times in this lesson about number, singular, plural, gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter, and then in one sense, what is the trickiest part? What is its function or case in the relative clause? Here's some other good examples which I would really encourage you to take a look at. I'll just focus on one more here before we get into the other exercises. Let's take a look at this one, number 2, which has another wrinkle, namely a preposition. So here we have, they give us the translation, so I'm not going to talk about that, but rather the Latin grammar. So the man about whom you were speaking is a dear friend. So what is the main clause? We need to be able to recognize that for understanding of this concept. The man is a dear friend. What do we mean by main clause? It can stand on its own. So we have a complete sentence. But then we're giving some further information, which makes it a complex sentence. So we're giving information about the man, because that is the only antecedent of the word in the sentence. That is, per logic, this has to be the antecedent. But then, is man singular or plural? Singular. What is its gender? It's masculine. But then, so we know it's masculine singular. So if we go back to our chart here, masculine singular, so it's either going to be qui, cuius, cui, quem, or quo. But then what is its function in the relative clause? Well, its function is ablative, because de as a preposition is always followed by the ablative. So we have de quo, and we translate that as about whom. So you can see this is really, this concept will really exemplify the importance of learning the cases in Latin, which kind of goes back to what we've talked about since the beginning of the course last fall rather, namely we have to know what these cases are and what their function is for English grammar when we're translating. All right, so please read this chapter a couple of times, paying particular example to the examples, if you will. And then, of course, you'll need to learn the vocabulary as well, which will be in our exercises. All right, so take a look at this note as well. All right, let's take a look at this right here. So, we'll do as we've often done, about the first 10, and then we'll read a short paragraph excerpt by Cicero. So let's start with number 1. So, salve bone amice cui filio meum here commissi, by the Latin writer Terence, and it means greetings, my good friend. So let me go ahead and write that right now. So, greetings, my good friend. Take that off there. And then how does it continue here? Well, we have cui, so let me just kind of go back. I'm not going to do this for all of these. This is where it gets a little bit awkward doing it online, where if we're in the classroom I could put this on the board. But so here's cui, so that is dative. Dative, remember, normally is to or for whom something is done. So, but you can see the cui as the form there. So we go back to the example, which is right here. So greetings, my good friend, to whom I sent yesterday my son. So let me go ahead and write that out and then try to explain it. Greetings, my good friend, to whom I sent yesterday my son. As always, you could change the word order. For example, where to put yesterday. I tend to keep it a little bit literally. So let's go back here. So here we have the vocative, like hello. So greetings, my good friend. And then to whom, commissi is I sent yesterday my son. So we need to be able to recognize that filium is the accusative, so that makes it the direct object because it ends in um. But then kamisi is the simple past form of sent. So mito, misere, misi, misum. Heri, like the word heritage in English, means yesterday. But then we put it all together as we have what I just gave as a possible translation. So here's our relative pronoun kui referring back to friend. So is friend singular or plural? Singular. What is its gender? Well, in this case, it's masculine. But then what is its function in the relative clause? In this case, after the comma. Well, its function in cui filium meum here commisi is the indirect object or the dative case, because here's our subject and verb. This is an adverb. This is a possessive adjective. Here's the direct object in the accusative case. So here's our cui, which I just noted a moment ago, is in the dative case. And so we put it all together. We have greetings, my good friend, to whom I sent yesterday my son. All right, let's move on here. Again, these wonky characters because this is Kindle version, but that's Dionysus. So Dionysius deco antidixi e Graecae ad Siciliam per tempestatem brevem sed potentam navigabat. So here, anytime we have a longer sentence, we're probably going to need to look up the words first and then kind of chunk it in terms of word by word, clause by clause. Once you know the vocabulary by using a dictionary or looking up the words, you're going to have something like this. Dionysius, about whom before I spoke from Greece to Sicily through storm, brief but powerful, was sailing. So let's go ahead, and this one's a little bit trickier. But once you know the vocab and go through it a couple of times, it's fairly easy. So Dionysius, about whom I spoke earlier. Let me go ahead and write that first. So Dionysius, about whom I spoke earlier. So if we go back here, so Dionysius, about whom I spoke earlier. So ante means earlier, like antebellum, pre-Civil War literature, for example. So about whom I spoke earlier. And then here's our verb, was sailing from Greece to Sicily. So I think in this case, we've got to be able to recognize the verb is at the end. So was sailing. And of course, what tense is that? That is imperfect. So we use past tense on that. And then sailing from Greece to Sicily. So from to Sicily. And then what were the conditions? Through a brief but powerful storm. Through a brief but powerful storm. Once again, I'm trying to keep it literal. You might have to, in a more polished translation, we're not publishing this with Harvard University Press, so we don't need to be too dogmatic about our translations. The important thing is to understand what we're doing. So we have Dionysus, about whom I spoke earlier, was sailing from Greece to Sicily through a brief but powerful storm. Once again, it's always possible to change the elements for stylistic reasons, but we're focusing on Latin and Latin grammar. Take a look at the adjective clause in this one. So quo is our relative pronoun, so we have to be able to recognize that. And so there it is right there, Q-U-O. So hold on to this. You can see it's an ablative masculine singular. Why is that the case? Let's take a look at the sentence in greater detail. Dionysus is the antecedent, so we're giving more information about Dionysus. Is Dionysus singular or plural? Singular. Is it masculine, feminine, or neuter? Well, it ends in US, so it's masculine. But then what is its function in the relative clause? As in the example earlier, we have a preposition here which automatically puts it in the ablative case because de is always followed by the ablative. So de quo, that is our relative pronoun in the masculine ablative singular. We also have some ablative from Greece. This is first declension ablative singular. This is first declension accusative singular because ad is always followed by am. So again, we need to know our am. So knowing our declensions, pretty important in Latin. And then per is always followed by the accusative. So storm is third declension. So third declension accusative singular is em, because storm is a third declension. And then brief also third declension, so is mighty. And then that's just a conjunction, and there is our verb. All right, moving on to number 3. Multi civis aut ea pericula quae imminent non vident aut ea quae vident neg legunt. So here we have Cicero. They give us at least one vocab word. So many citizens, so multi civis. Let's go ahead and start with that. So again, you may have to look up some of these words, but once you've done that, you're probably going to have many citizens. Now in English, we often expect the verb to come next, but here we might be able to work with this. Now, out means either or, so it just needs to be memorized as a conjunctive pairing. So either what or what. So many citizens either do not see those dangers which threaten. So let me write that out first. So many citizens either do not This one is a little bit longer. So once again, you could probably change the word order depending on, but it still needs to be syntactically and in terms of tenses and cases still correct. But many citizens either do not see, non vident, will see what? Those dangers. So that is second declension neuter plural ending in a. So there's accusative plural for the plural accusative direct object. So either do not see those dangers that, so you could use that or which, that threaten or are threatening, or they neglect those that they see. So let me go ahead and write that down. Or they got their head in the sand. In other words, they neglect those that they see. Let's see, I need to put that in the plural. So once again, many citizens either do not see, non-vident, those dangers, that's probably just going to have to be memorized, those dangers that threaten, or they neglect or are neglecting those that they see. So once again, the meaning seems to be that they have their head in the sand or they think somebody else is going to be responsible for the state of the republic. Moving on to number 4 here, bis dat qui cito dat. So he gives twice who gives quickly. So this is a Roman proverb. So let me write this out here. So he gives twice who gives quickly. This one's shorter, so it'll be easier to explain. So he gives, dot, I think we had this word in chapter 1. So do, I give, das, you give, dot, he, she, it, we give, damos, we give, datis, you all give, dot, they give. And then bis means twice, like bicycle or biennial. And then who, so this is our relative pronoun in the masculine singular, so qui, referring back to whoever gives twice. So he gives twice, who gives, and then cito is just an adverb meaning quickly. So if we were to look this up on Whitaker's Words, you'll see it's just an adverb in this particular context, meaning quickly. Again, only the context will tell you what its exact meaning is. So here's our relative pronoun referring back to an unstated subject, in this case he, and so we need a nominative form of the relative pronoun because its function in the relative clause is as the subject. All right, let's take a look at number 5. So we have qui caepit dimidium facti habet incipe from Horace. Most famous, of course, for Carpe Diem, seize the day. So here we have whoever begins, or I guess whoever began, I guess it's past tense, so I'll write that out. So whoever began. Now this one is somewhat aphoristic, so it could be he who has begun would be another possible reading of that. But then has half of the deed. So whoever, in fact, let me check. Whoever has begun has half of, I guess in this case maybe not deed, although it is where we get the word fact. I can type here. Has half of the achievement. Again, a Roman proverb. So qui caepit. So again, you may need to look up these words, as I'm doing now, just for illustration purposes. But here we have caepio, but it is actually it doesn't really. Let me see. So in that case, I'm glad I looked it up here because since this is in present tense, it might make sense to keep this in present tense. So whoever begins has half of the achievement, or half of the deed, half of the accomplishment could be another reading of that. So let's take a look at this in greater detail. This is just a relative pronoun, he or whoever, or he who has, and then begins, and then has, habet, referring back to he. And then dimidium, they give us what that means, half. And then facti is in the genitive because factus, so genitive singular, facti. And this one could mean a number of things. Facts, as you know, can mean a variety of things, but in this particular case, fact, deed, act, or achievement might be one of the best possibilities. All right, moving on to number 6. Levis est fortuna, id cito reposcit quad dedit, from Publilius Cyrus. Reposco, like poaching, to demand back. We have a new Doberman puppy, so she's scared because somebody's outside. So Levis, you may hear her in the background. Levis est fortuna, id cito reposcit quad dedit. Now, Levis is not Levi's, but if we look this up here, Levis is light, thin, trivial, capricious, trifling. This one, you're going to have to decide which one you think works best. So fortune is fickle, is probably so here fortune is the main subject, and then this is an adjective which they put first. So fortune is fickle. Fortune is fickle. It, referring back to fortune, so it demands back quickly that which it gave. So let me write that out and then try to explain it. It demands back quickly what it gave. So fortuna est levis, fortune is fickle. It, referring back to fortune, demands back quickly. So cito means quickly is an adverb. And then there's a couple options of how to translate this, but it's referring back to id. So id is neuter. So if we go back to our chart here at the beginning of the chapter, singular, neuter, accusative is quad, and referring back to it. And so only the context will tell you that. Again, that's going to be the trickiest part of this chapter, is figuring out the context of the adjective clauses. And then dedit is the simple past of give, which we had in number 4. So in third person singular, so do, dauri, dedidatum. And so we make sure we put that in the past tense. Number septem, fortuna eam stultum facit quam nimium amat. So fortune makes him stupid, whom it loves. Now nimium is another adverb that we'll probably have to look up. So too much. So fortune makes him stupid, who it loves or whom it loves too much. So fortune makes him stupid, whom it loves too much. So what does it even mean? Well, I guess the idea here is that if you're just relying on luck and not virtue or hard work, for example, or your education, then, in one sense, you really haven't done anything. And I guess that's maybe the sense of it. Again, I don't know this author too well. We'd have to look at the original context. Maybe it's meant as humor. But let's take a look at the grammar here. So fortuna, that's our subject, makes, so facit, and then eum is the direct object, and then this is where we get the word stupid. So makes him stupid. Now here is our relative pronoun quem, referring back to him. So we need the accusative form of the relative pronoun, which is quem, because him is masculine, but then its function in the relative pronoun, or rather the relative clause, is as the direct object. And then amat is referring back to, or rather agrees with fortune. All right, we had a puppy interruption. Trying to figure out what order is. 1 second, please. All right, let's go on to number 8. Non solum fortuna ipsa est caecus, sed etiam eos caecus facit quos semper audiuvat. So here we have a longer sentence. All right, let's try this again. We have a older Italian greyhound, and he doesn't quite understand the Doberman puppy. All right, so as always, when we have a longer sentence, we're probably going to have to look up the words, either in the back of the book or a dictionary or Whitaker's Words. So once we have looked up the words, you're going to have something like this. Not only fortune itself is blind, but also those blind makes, who always helps. So then, once you know the vocab, we need to figure out what is the main clause. Well, most of the time in Latin it does come first, but we may have to use context clues. Fortune is the subject. How do we know that? Well, context clues, but also because fortune ends in a nominative ending, namely fortuna, and the nominative is always the subject in Latin. So fortune itself is not only blind. Fortune itself is not only blind. So let me put that down so we have that. So fortune itself is not only blind, but it also makes. So facit means it makes, and etiam means also, but it also makes those blind. So we need to be able to recognize these are both in the accusative plural of the second declension, namely os. So kaikos for those blind, eos. But it also makes those blind. Fortune itself is not only blind, but it also makes those blind who it always helps. Who it always helps. So let's take a look at this last part in particular. So quos is referring back to those blind. So those, is that singular or plural? It's plural. Is it masculine, neuter, or feminine? In this case, it's going to be masculine. But then its function in the relative clause is as the accusative direct object. So we go back here, you're going to see we have plural, masculine, accusative, which is quos, referring back to eos, kaikos. So that one is not tricky, but this is a new concept for us, and it's going to take a while to get used to recognizing what the endings in Latin are referring to, because we don't have named objects or subjects, but rather we have endings, and only the context clues and careful study of vocabulary and practice will sometimes make that clearer as you continue learning Latin. So novem, bis vincit qui se vincit in victoriae. So bis we had earlier. So he conquers twice who conquers himself in victory. So let me write that down. He, or it could be she, but probably he, and if we're being honest about the ancient world. So he conquers twice who conquers himself in victory. What does that mean? Well, if you let it go to your head and you become arrogant, you lose virtue, and whatever victory you had will be diminished, seems to be the sense of it. So bis vincit, so he conquers twice, vincit quis, and then who, referring back to he who conquers twice, and then conquers himself, there's our reflexive pronoun, and then in victory. So notice in victory is in the ablative because it's followed by a preposition. All right, let's go on to the last one of the main ones. So here we have pretense or insincerity, in other words, being dishonest with oneself and others. So pretense destroys the truth, without which the name of friendship is not able to prevail, or exist, or even to be. So pretense, let's go ahead and write this down here. So pretense destroys the truth, without which the name of friendship is not able to, I'm going to go flourish for valere, literally to prevail, to do well. Once again, if we look it up in our Whitaker's, we have prevail, healthy, influential, powerful, strong, but I'm going to go with flourish for my own interpretation. Let's talk about this one in greater detail. Here's our subject, similatio. So they tell us right here, it's pretense. Delete, like delete, and then just deletes what? The truth, that is third declension, accusative singular, em. So that's the direct object. Without which, sine que, without which. So here, what is it talking about here? It's referring back to virtue. So virtue is feminine. So we're going to need a feminine singular, but sine is always followed by the ablative. How do we know that? Well, we learn it, or if not, we have to look it up. And you can see it's a preposition followed by the ablative. What does that mean in terms of the relative pronoun? Well, it means that we need singular, feminine, ablative singular, which if you go back to the chart in the beginning is que, Q-U-A, with the macron singular, feminine, ablative singular. Let's see here, going back to the example. So pretense destroys the truth, without which the name of friendship, so of friendship, that's going to be first declension genitive singular. So of friendship would how we would read that. The name of friendship, and then is not able, non potest, to flourish or to do well. All right, let's take a look at on the pleasures of love in old age. And I'll just shorten this one, say love in old age. Give it a shorter title for us. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and read this here. Esne amor in senectate, voluptes enam minor est, sed minor quoque est cupiditas. Nihil autem escure nobis, sid non cupimus, et non caret est qui non desiderat. Adolescentes nimos desiderant, sene satis amore saepe habent, et multum sapientiae, cogito igitur hoc tempus vitae esse jucundum. This is from Cicero's great essay De Senectate on old age. They give us a little bit of vocab as well as some questions to ponder in terms of interpretation. So let's take a look at here. And so esne, here we have the ne, and we have a question mark. So this is the enclitic tachon in Latin, asking a yes-no question. Is there love in old age? So is there is how we interpret this. Amor is our subject in old age. So let's go ahead and put that there. Is there love in old age? Voluptas enam minor est. This is where we get words like voluptuousness. Voluptes could mean a number of things. You might want to look this up for some options. Pleasure, delight, enjoyment. So it's kind of limited in this case, but let's go with pleasure. We'll go with the first one here. For pleasure is reduced or small. So for pleasure is reduced. Again, it kind of loses a little bit in translation, but you get the idea here. For pleasure is reduced. In other words, there is less pleasure. But less too is desire. But less too is desire. But less, or quoque can also mean also, but less also is desire. Think of Cupid. But nothing is dear to us. So let's focus on this. Right. So, but nothing is dear to us. That one's pretty straightforward if you just look up the vocab here. But nothing is dear to us if we do not desire. In other words, that if we do not desire it, is sort of the implied object here. But nothing is dear to us if we do, or I guess have no desires. I'm going to change the grammar a little bit and make it like a direct object, but otherwise we just have if we do not desire. So nothing is dear to us, but nothing is dear to us if we have no desires. And non carat is, and he is not dear, and that who is not desiring. So this one's going to be a little bit tricky to translate. Et non caret, let's take a look at this to see what our options are on this here. Free from, or devoid of, or be without. So if we go back to here, but he is not without care who had not desired. So this one is going to be kind of tricky to translate here. So he, let's see here. The meaning is clear, but how to translate in English, we have to figure this out here. So he is free from care. Let's see, make sure this is, I guess it could mean care, zeal, cure, treatment, trouble, anxiety, worry. All of these really don't make as much sense in English as they do in the original Latin. So we're going to have to keep it literal rather. And he is not free from, so I'm going to say that one right there. He is not free from. Let me get the punctuation right. Now we have our relative pronoun coming up. And he is not free from care who has not desired. So again, just kind of loses a little bit in translation. And he is not free from care who has not desired. What does that even mean? Well, if, the idea here is that as you get older in age, according to Cicero, you tend to lose the enthusiasms of youth. So maybe youthful passion. I think Romeo and Juliet is different in older age, but you have different kinds of pleasures, but they may not have the emotional intensity of amorous love, is sort of what he's saying here. But just because it lacks that particular form doesn't mean it's not a desire. Here we are on Easter Sunday. Think of the Passion of Christ and the love of Christ and the love of God. Clearly, that has nothing to do with amorous sexuality, but rather a kind of deep desire for goodness, if not salvation. And so that is sort of the logic of desire that Cicero is trying to spell out. And by the way, that may be one reason why this is a little bit tricky to translate, is because we tend to think of desire as largely biological, even sexual, and this idea of desire for truth is not something that modern man seems to pursue in any serious kind of way, or desire for wisdom. Even desire for salvation is debatable in terms of to what extent modern man has such a desire. And so that's the sense of it is, but going back to the reading here, but nothing is dear to us if we have no desires. So you got to have something that is going to motivate you. And he is not free from care who has not desired. That one's a tricky one to translate. But then moving on here, so we have adolescence, so young people desired too much, literally had desired too much. So in our youth, young people had desired too much. So young people had desired too much. Young people had desired too much. Once again, you probably could translate it as this as well. This is something I don't do often in this format just because I just don't. But the sense of it, of course, is when we were young, we often were moved too much by desire. But you can see why I don't do this is that this adds a lot of words in the English translation that are not in the Latin, which in my experience this tends to confuse people. So I tend to keep it rather literal. But this is pluperfect. It is where we get words like desire and others. But then we go on to sene satis amore saepe habent, and then senes, old people. Again, that's kind of that misses the point of it too, is that senes for Cicero is someone who has wisdom. Think of Plato's philosopher king. And so when we say old people, we tend to think of people who are in some retirement community. That's clearly not what Cicero is thinking about. What he's saying is that somebody who has been there, done that, but has gone on to experience other things in life beyond the enthusiasms of youth. And so a person of wisdom, again, think of Plato's philosopher king or Marcus Aurelius. So senes, but let's go ahead and look this up, see if it gives us some options. I'm going to say in old age when I look at that there. So in old age, we often have had enough of love. In old age, we often have had enough of love and a lot of wisdom. One of the challenges with this particular excerpt is it is an abridged from the original passage, which is taking out a lot of words, so it's a little bit choppy in my view. So think therefore this time to be, think therefore this time of life to be joyful. So that last sentence is fairly straightforward. So think therefore this time to be, this time of life Okay, think therefore this time of life to be joyful. So think therefore, cogito, therefore this time of life to be joyful. Jucundum. Let's see if they give us any other options on Whitaker's. Could be pleasant, agreeable, delightful. Let's go with delightful. That sounds a little bit better in my view. Okay, so that is that. So again, kind of bracketing this sentence right here, which is a little bit tricky. So, but nothing is dear to us if we do not desire, and he who has not desired is not free from care. But again, that just loses a little bit in translation. But then the rest of it, I think, fairly straightforward. Adolescents or young people have often, doesn't say often, but have often desired too much. But in old age, we have enough. We have had enough of love and much wisdom. So that's sort of the compensation, according to Cicero. As you get older, you lose certain desires and passions, but others can emerge as part of human development. And then think, therefore, this time of life to be pleasant. All right, and then here is a good question to consider. That's it for this chapter. Moving ahead, we have one more chapter this semester. First and second conjugation passive, which will be another major grammar topic. But then the final exam will focus on chapters 16, 17, and 18, but be cumulative going back to chapter 10, which was the first chapter at the beginning of the semester. But again, the emphasis will be on the last 3 chapters.